Hey everyone, quick heads up. There was a part of this conversation that didn't make the final cut, but it was too funny not to include, so I just added it at the end of this episode. After the credits, you can take a listen.
I'm excited to welcome a friend from way back, Dolio, to the podcast. Dolio is one part of a band called Gangstergrass, which uses bluegrass and hip-hop to create a new sound. They're heard by many because of the theme song to the FX show Justified, or from their 4 Yes audition on America's Got Talent, or one of their many albums. I've always been curious about the genre-bending sound, and today's the day I get to learn more. Dolio, can you introduce yourself for people listening, and welcome to the podcast?
Hey, El Dolio Durant, a.k.a. Dolio the Sloot, originally from Pensacola, Florida. It's a big part of who I am. It's an old place with a lot of history. My whole family's there still. I currently live in Philadelphia. Oldest brother of 7 siblings. Well, I got 3 brothers, 4 sisters, but I'm the oldest. I'm also a husband, father, an uncle, godfather, activist, lead technical instructor, teaching coding, software engineering, data engineering, also a student.
Right.
And of course, I'm a MC, musician, singer, producer, DJ, writer, composer, and a board member of a nonprofit.
Man, we're going to get into a lot of that stuff, and I can't wait. But I always like to make sure people understand how we know each other. And I know this is going back 30 years, but how do we know each other?
We know each other from school over at the Institute at MIT. I was a senior in high school. It was pre-frosh weekend. We were playing spades in your dorm room.
That sounds about right. That's what we did. And, I remember meeting you because I hadn't met anybody from Pensacola. And I was like, where exactly is that? And you sort of told me it's, somewhere in Florida. And I was like, okay, cool. And I realized how country Florida was until I drove down to an internship in Fort Lauderdale. And I drove down from Boston. And man, there is a huge stretch where there was nothing but country music on the radio.
Oh, yeah. A lot of people don't realize how country Florida is. They think about Florida, they think about like Disneyland and South Beach, but
exactly,
that's really just 2 like little oases in amongst a very large state. Florida's a lot larger than people realize,
Yeah, and I remember looking back through some of the photos when Facebook came out, and I had posted some photos of us, I'll say in some dorm festivities, and you had your locks going and were pretty intense in some of those photos. I won't share any of those in the show notes, but let's just say if you step out of line on this podcast, I've got some leverage.
Hey, I mean, there's a lot of things out there that from, just throughout the years of me being rambunctious.
Yeah, well, some things are better left unsaid. Let's get into it. You ready?
Yeah.
Dolio, I said at the top that you're a part of a band named Gangstergrass, whose music sits at the intersection of bluegrass and hip-hop, and I really want to get into that. But why don't we start at the beginning, or your beginning? What was your first exposure to music and sound?
A lot of it was early life stuff. Music was always in the home. My mom, she had me when she was 15. She was pregnant at 14. And music was always playing. She sings. My grandmother played the piano at church. I was since I was maybe about 5 or 6. Basically, as soon as I was like old enough to like sit upright on the bench, I would basically be sitting next to her every Sunday while she played the piano there. And then like my uncles, they had their little breakdance crew.
Right.
And my uncles, they all play percussion. And, most people in my family at least play at least one instrument.
And were you exposed to hip hop at an early age?
Yeah. Like I said, my mom being young and coming up during a time when like hip hop was starting to pop, her and her siblings were heavy into it. So like my hip hop exposure started early, basically just raiding her record collection. Like she had stuff like the Fat Boys and Sugar Hill and early LL Cool J stuff.
And so I have to ask then, I get the hip hop part, but where did the bluegrass part come from?
The bluegrass stuff I kind of really got into really more heavily once I started into the scene of the country scene in like New York when I first moved there. It started getting peppered into my musical catalog early in life because like, in the South, like you said, you're going through Florida, things are very country. So there's country playing just about everywhere.
Right.
And, despite the predominant portrayal of country, there's a lot of black people in country. It's only, a hop, skip, and a jump away from blues.
Mm-hmm.
The honky tonks and the juke joints are pretty much the same spots. So, like, we would listen to, like, Soul Train on Saturdays, back when there was only, like, a handful of channels.
Right, right.
And then, like, Sundays, Hee Haw would be on. So we kind of got exposed to, like, country early on, so everybody was listening to everything. I mean, some country was actually playing on, what is now considered like black radio,
Mm-hmm.
where they would have the R&B and eventually hip hop and stuff, but they would still play stuff like Kenny Rogers, The Gambler, and Charlie Daniels, Devil Went Down to Georgia, and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. But Devil Went Down to Georgia was kind of almost a hip hop record, to tell you the truth, but it was heavy with that bluegrass southern rock type of thing.
Right. And did you get exposure beyond your immediate surroundings when you were in school and when you were growing up in Pensacola?
Other than like the stuff I was going through and listening to and hearing around, usually around Super Bowl weekend, I was part of the Engineering Explorers. We would take these trips up to Gatlinburg, Tennessee for sort of like this retreat roundup type of thing of all the scouts. There is like tons of history there musically, as far as like Dollywood's around there, just around the corner from there, up in Pigeon Forge. The Rocky Top record, I went to the studio where Rocky Top was
Mm-hmm.
recorded. So there's like a lot of like bluegrass and old time that got recorded around there. So kind of get that exposure because it's live music happening around you.
And where did you get the exposure or the idea to sit at the intersection of the two genres that you sit in front of? I think we might be fast forwarding several years, but I know that you moved to New York. But how did the idea come? Because I live in the tri-state. I grew up in the tri-state, and I wasn't hearing fusion like you all are creating there. So how did the idea come to you?
Funny thing happened after like living and working in the Boston, Cambridge area for a number of years, and I had just gotten into law school, and I was deciding I was going to defer a year whilst I, got all my affairs and funds in order.
Right, as one does.
At the same time, I had, gotten kind of disgusted with the path that music was going down
Mm-hmm.
as I was doing a lot of like, I guess what would be called traditional hip hop. It's funny to say that,
Right.
but at the time I was neck deep in it, and there was just some element around me that I'd finding myself kind of falling backsliding into, and I was like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, let me separate myself from this, change my environment, got rid of most of my stuff. I was just gonna put music on the back burner
Right.
and then move, try out the New York thing for a little while. I had never lived in New York, so I decided to check it out. I moved to Brooklyn, of all places, in Bushwick, and literally like 3 days after being there, my new roommate took me out to a concert where like one of his former guitar students was playing, and it was like sort of that Williamsburg funk jazz fusion type stuff they were doing. Somebody in the audience recognized my face from DJing and throwing shows and parties in Boston. And they sparked up a conversation between like the DJ who was the house DJ at the venue,
Mm-hmm.
and somehow the band who I did not know,
Right.
and tried to convince me to scratch over the band's performance for the second half of the performance after the intermission. I was like, okay, I don't know you, I don't know them, I really don't know this DJ, and I know I personally wouldn't want some strange dude sweating all over my headphones.
Right. Right.
But the DJ there was like, and I kind of wish I knew remembered the guy's name, because it ended up changing my whole life. But the DJ was like, okay, if this guy vouches for you, then you must be dope.
Then we good.
And I was like, I don't even know what records you got. And he was like, man, I've seen you work before. You don't even need to know what records he has. And I was like, oh, all right, cool. So second half of the show, after the intermission, I'm up there on the turntables, just cutting it up. After the show, as it was letting out, this mysterious dude just rolls up to me and he's like, hey, you don't know me, but I have this idea and there's this thing I'm doing, and I'm looking for a new DJ. And it turns out it was for this band he had called Battlestar America, which was like this country funk hip hop hybrid type thing. And he came by my crib with some records and well with some tracks, and I did some scratching over it. I think I picked up a Royce the 5'9"
Right.
record and like pulled the acapella on it and just did a whole lot of juggling of the words over it,
Hmm.
just making phrases the way I would do. And he was impressed, and ever since then I was working with Wrench. We did Battlestar for a few years. Eventually, they shorted the name to B Star. On the last B Star album, What We Do, there's a song on there that I wrote because during that period of time, that kind of got me back into doing music. That and another friend in New York that was angry when they found out I quit music.
Right.
Pretty much forced me to go do an audition at the Harlem Gospel Choir, so I started touring with them too. I was singing tenor with them and then DJing and occasionally rapping with B Star because later they discovered that I could rap. Doing shows with them got me back into making beats, and making beats got me back in the booth.
Of course.
I had
Of course. So let me ask you, you go down this path and you start injecting and fusing all kinds of different music together, different genres together. It sounds like you're bringing a whole set of skills to the table. You're rapping, you're singing, you're beat juggling, you're word juggling. When did you realize this was going to be home for you? It sounds like you were reluctant, sort of like you're trying to run away from it and it keeps pulling you back in. But when did you decide, like, you know what, this could actually be a career for me, and I could actually do this as a job and as a career?
to be honest, as far as that last part, it really didn't really stick with me until like maybe a few years ago.
Like 20,
Um,
20 years in.
yeah, I was like, well, the thing is that for me, music was kind of always like my outlet, like my
Mm-hmm.
therapy before I really had a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
I have, a number of things I've been dealing with for years, my PTSD and anxiety and all that stuff that comes with the experiences of life. And some of the things that I've witnessed and experienced would have to need some sort of outlet or else a person would go mad.
Right.
But I was doing it more like a hobby. And then I kept trying not to really take it serious professionally, but just because of how toxic the industry itself is. And just, it really does wear down your psyche. But I think it was because I was trying not to. And at the time, I was dating the woman who's now my wife, who's an artist. She's a visual artist by trade. And basically, she told me, she said, your problem is you're an artist and you're closeted.
Mm-hmm.
And until you come out of the closet and admit to yourself that you're an artist and take it seriously, then you're going to lose your mind. And when I started taking it serious is when I guess people started decided they wanted to write checks for it. And once I take it serious, I was like, oh wow, there's actually people listening to this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's when it started to click because I did not want to do what everyone else was doing.
Yeah.
I've experienced and lived in the life and in the shoes of a lot of the stories that people tell already. And I was like, okay, people have already heard that story. They already know about the problem. They've already heard all of the hood tales. Something needs to be, something new has to be out there. And it had to be something that I enjoyed doing. This gave me an opportunity to tell the type of stories I wanted to tell, to feed the kind of energy I wanted to have
Mm-hmm.
around me. And I guess we live in an age where if you are willing to do the work of searching it out, you can find those other people that connect to that.
Mm-hmm. And I have to ask before we go to break for a second, what happened to your law school deferral?
A lot of my friends at the time who were lawyers, during that time, the deferral went from like being 1 year to being 2 years, then being 3 years. But in that 3 year span, a good 80% of the lawyers I knew decided they didn't want to be lawyers anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, it was like, okay, I don't love the law.
Right.
It seems to be that the people that stayed in it were people that love the
Yep.
law. They love it. They love the institutions. They believe in the institutions. and that I had become disillusioned with the institutions themselves, and also not having a love, a full on adoration for the practice. I just knew that it would be something that I would probably grow disinterest with or frustrated with after a while, and I wanted to be able to do something where I could see the changes happening.
Cool. So you just cut to the end. You just cut right to the part where you're not a lawyer without going. Um,
Yeah, I was like, okay, I don't want to. I was like, I'm still paying off these other loans. I don't want to spend another hundred and plus $1,000 on something that I am probably going to decide not to do in a few years.
Elle, I want to get into some of the things that make being at the intersection of bluegrass and hip hop special to you. You got into some of those things, or you started to get into some of those things in the last segment. So why don't we pick up the thread and go from there?
Well, it seems like, look, the way it is that we've been kind of building out this space because there was nobody else that did what we were doing,
Mm-hmm.
as far as like bluegrass and hip hop, and also doing it as a live band.
Right.
There's been plenty of people who like sample stuff and try to do it, and there's sort of like this hick hop thing that kind of started like in the early 2000s that has its own thing that it eventually kind of evolved into what country music sounds like now. They're called like bro country, which is like hip hop influenced pop music with a twang.
Mm-hmm.
But we're seem to be setting out a course where people can be more pure with what they're doing and still mingle
Right.
with it. So like basically like building out this new genre, even though we kind of are at the same time trying to dispel genre itself as this mythological element.
One of the things you just mentioned there, you're doing it with a live band. What is the composition of the band? What instruments? How many people?
Well, we have our touring band, and we also have like our main like ensemble crew.
Mm-hmm.
What we tour with typically is 5-person ensemble, which is two MCs, including myself, Wrench on guitar and vocals and beats.
Mm-hmm.
He operates the beats with like foot pedal. We usually also have a banjo player and a fiddle. Sometimes we'll have, in addition to that, dobro, mandolin. Sometimes we'll also have a DJ, depending on what city we're in. And is because we still collaborate with a lot of artists, we'll end up having guest artists who will perform with us as well. When we're in like Chicago region, we'll have the Lowdown Brass Band.
Mm-hmm.
We just started adding horns every now and then. Actually, this cat Kadesh, who plays the trombone in Kansas City, who will come out from time to time and rock with us. We just did a thing in Dallas not too long ago, like earlier in the month, where we had 3 banjo players at the same time. Yeah, we had this really cool cat Demeanor who plays the banjo and raps. He's out of North Carolina.
You mentioned that you're pushing the envelope further and you're doing things that other people aren't doing. One of the things that was interesting to me was seeing you all perform in Chicago several years ago. Not only are you doing things other people aren't doing, you're bringing together people that other people aren't bringing together. I went to this show, it was on the north side of Chicago, and you had your hip hop heads there. I was there with my camera, but you had the hipsters there.
Yeah.
There was a guy who looked like he had just gotten off his tractor. He was in overalls. I don't know where he drove in from, but he definitely wasn't from Chicago. What does that mean when you're looking out at a crowd like that? And when you have like an opening act, who do they even have open for you? Like who leads up to what you all are doing if nobody else is doing what you all are doing?
It varies from city to city. It baffles booking agents and bookers and promoters and stuff because they don't quite know who to place us with. So we tell them we don't care. You just, as long as they're dope, as long as they're good and they can rock a crowd, it doesn't matter what genre you put in front of us. Just know that we're still going to tear the house down right afterwards, So it's been everything from country artists, rock artists, hip hop artists. There was in, I think, Durham, there was this reggae, sort of more like roots reggae dance hall country fusion. So they did like reggae covers of country songs, of like Charlie Pride songs. So it was already taking like black country and turning it into like reggae, like with they had the congas and the horns and everything just getting down, and they tore it down, and then They rock with us, we rock with them. It's fun because of the fact that nobody quite knows what to do with us as far as like who to open for us. And because we have this open-ended thing that where we're just like it doesn't matter, it also forms like these relationships between us and other musicians that work in other genres and brings together audiences that may have come to see them to get introduced to our stuff or may have come to see us to get introduced to their stuff. And because of that intersection of hip hop and bluegrass, you get like a bunch of bluegrass heads in there. You get a bunch of hip hop heads. You get folks that don't like either. Like they're like, I don't like rap, and for some reason, and I don't like bluegrass. I'm more of a honky tonk person myself, but I love you guys. Or folks that'll be like, I mostly listen to jazz or I mostly listen to metal, but for some reason I love you guys. And I think a lot of it has to do with our live show and what we put into it.
Mm-hmm.
And live show is basically what feeds us when we were writing our stuff because we write a lot of stuff on the road and we try at least these past couple of albums we've tried to bring a lot of the live feel into the albums.
Mm-hmm.
So usually the stuff that ends up by the time we make it to the studio with a lot of times it's stuff we've played out, at least a few times. Also our technique of recording involves us all in the room together at the same time, everyone mic'd up, and we play through it. So
dope.
if you can't do it live, you can't do it.
That's dope.
As far as I'm concerned.
Earlier in our conversation, you mentioned that what you do feels like therapy for you. And I wanted to dig into that a little bit more. How does that show up in your art, and what does that really mean in practice?
It's kind of like reason like a lot of artists get into their thing. It's their mode of communication.
Mm-hmm.
It's their mode of expression. It's my voice. I can say serious, deep things that people aren't quite cognizant of what's being said the first time they listen. Sometimes, the first time they listen to it, they're hearing it,
Mm-hmm.
but the second time they're listening to it. They might have danced to it or bobbed their head to it, and then later on they'll hear the line, and they'll say, "Wait a minute, did he say?" Wow. And part of it is just kind of like the experiences I've had and growing up. I kind of, you notice that nobody really wants to listen to a black man speak unless they could dance to it half the time, or if it's something that's being said that's profitable to them.
Exactly. What are some of the topics you cover in your music? I admit I listened to The Blackest Thing on the Menu, which I think might be your latest album, a couple times since we were preparing for this. And it was exactly the experience you're describing, where I listened to it once and it was cool. I listened to it a second time, I was like, oh. And then I listened to it the third time, I was like, wait, what did he just say?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I do like to go with like triple entendres a lot of times. But we talk about just about everything. That's probably why we've connected so much with our audience. Is the 8 studio albums we've had so far is we've covered the gamut. Environmental topics, domestic abuse, recidivism, prison industrial complex, the drug war, geopolitical issues, consent, bodily autonomy, police brutality. Then of course, the usual topics of like love, loss, poverty, economic and sociological inequalities. It pretty much covers it.
Are all of the songs that you write that serious and that heavy?
No, we have uplifting songs, motivational, unifying songs. That we had, our album before that was No Time for Enemies. We had a song called Ride With You that kind of was like inviting everybody that, we understand that there's monsters to fight and there's always going to be this ongoing struggle, but the only way we're going to really overcome these things are together. I mean, it's sort of like implied in a lot of the stuff we have on the current album, like the only way out is through,
Right. It also occurred to me when we were talking about this, you have songs about pie and circles and some lighter topics.
Yeah, the Pi Day song we wrote actually, and then we released it on a Pi Day. I can't remember which year it was. It was post pandemic, and it was used to wake up the Mars rover on Pi Day.
And just to be clear, just two MIT engineers rapping here. Pi Day is March 14th.
Yes.
3.14.
Yeah, 3.14. Yeah, and that's probably the nerdiest song I ever sat down to write because we all big nerds. I mean, to be honest, you'll be hard pressed to find an MC who is worth their salt on the mic who is not a big nerd in
Mm-hmm.
some way.
Mm-hmm.
And because we both went to the pinnacle of nerdery, I feel like we kind of already have the grasp on the definition of what a nerd is, and that's really just someone who has decided to excel and have expertise in a certain field. Because sometimes get confused with geek, but geek is really about having an obsession to the expense of all other things. So one can be a geek without being a nerd, and one can be a nerd without being a geek, and one can be both.
I'm going to let people sit on that for a minute, and we're going to take a break right here. As we start to wrap up, I just wanted to cover one more thing that we talked about when we were preparing for this that you said was special about sitting at the intersection of bluegrass and hip hop with Gangstagrass. You were touring when we had that conversation, and I'm just curious, has your music taken you and the band to many places and places that you didn't necessarily think you'd get to in life?
Yes.
Simply put.
It's taken them, well, because of the genre it is and this intersection of the genre, and I guess the novelty of it at first. But once people got past the novelty, they were like, okay, these people really know how to tear the house down. So booking agents started catching wind. We There's a lot of festivals that I did not know about
Mm-hmm.
until this journey. So we play all over the country. So far, we've been in, I guess, 44 of the 50 states.
Wow.
We haven't played in Mississippi, Montana, Hawaii, and Wyoming, and I think North Dakota.
Not yet. Not yet. But you also get overseas, don't you?
Yeah, we get overseas quite a bit. Typically the summer and sometimes in this like spring or late fall. Well, I guess the gamut they pretty much spread the whole year nowadays. But we get over to Europe. We go to Canada. I've done some solo stuff in like Cuba and Fiji, Spain. That's just this year we were in Italy, the UK, Morocco. Last year we did like Iceland, Denmark, Czech Republic, Eastern Germany, like Netherlands.
And what are people coming to see? Do they think of you all as an American band? Do they think of you like what do people think they're signing up for when they buy a ticket?
Um, well, the thing is that funny thing is here in the States, there's all this obsession with genre.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole concept of musical genre itself came at the advent of commercialization of recorded music.
Mm-hmm.
What was happening in the earlier parts of recorded music is that there's a lot of what we're doing, which is just a bunch of people making music together, regardless of where they're from and who they were with. Early country music and southern music and gospel and rock and all that stuff is a bunch of folks of different genders and races together making music. But the industry, because Jim Crow and segregation was happening at the same time, all of this was starting to pop. They had to find ways to market this music to different demographics, or at least they felt they had to. So what would happen is that you had the same records, sometimes have the exact same record, and it would be labeled as like hillbilly music, and they put a white face on the cover and marketed the actual band
Mm-hmm.
to the black population as what they would call race records. And that's like the beginning of genre.
Mm-hmm.
After that, then you start taking, okay, there's art, rhythm and blues, which eventually people just kind of merged and make it R&B. But rhythm and blues was really just two sides of the records. There was one side that was like slow bluesy, and the other side was the dance stuff. Here, they segregate that. They segregate the record stores have these different categories. Yet they segregate the radio stations, the video stations that market the videos all
Mm-hmm.
have, okay, all the rap goes on here, and all the country goes on this, and all the rock goes on here, and all the R&B records go on this. Over there, there's American music. That's all they've already got all the other countries. They got so many countries around them to where they can't separate by genre,
Mm-hmm.
because then you'd have way too many divisions because the countries are next to each other like states.
Right.
So,
Right.
so when they hear us, they're like, "Oh, but of course, this is what American music sounds like." Because what they hear is, "Oh, there's Jay-Z, there's Johnny Cash. They both come out of America, so therefore that's what that is."
That's amazing. And on that note, I want to give people a sense of where they can listen and hear more. You know, I'm always trying to give our listeners exposure to people and topics that might be new to them. I'm pretty sure Gangsta Grass and what you all are doing is going to be a part of that for folks. But if they want to hear more or follow along your journey or come to a live show, which I highly recommend, where can they find your music? Where can they see you perform? How can they stay in touch?
The quickest way you can find our stuff is on gangstagrass.com, but you can also stream it on all the streaming platforms. If you wanted to get to any of my solo stuff, dsleuth.com or doliothesleuth.com, either one of those will get you there. And the important thing is remember it's Gangsta Grass, GANGSTAGRASS, grass.com. Although gangstergrass.com will take you there, but it's the name of the band is Gangsta Grass.
Gotta cover all the bases.
Yeah. Also, any Google search of the words bluegrass and hip hop will bring us up for like the first 20 pages.
Pretty much. Yeah, there's not a lot there. But listen, I wanted to thank you for coming on. I'll include all of that detail, both to your solo stuff and the band stuff. And I encourage people to check it out. It's a very unique sound, but it's catchy, man. And it's really awesome to see you doing your thing. And thanks for taking time out. I know you just got home after touring. It's late on the East Coast, and I appreciate you spending the time with me today.
No problem. Anytime.
Thanks for listening to this episode of My Home is Special. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast to get future episodes automatically. You can go to myhomeisspecial.com to see the full project and sign up for email updates. Be sure to follow KBevPhoto on Instagram or go to kbevphoto.com to see what I'm snapping these days. There's a lot on both to explore. For now, this is Keith, aka KBev, signing off. Peace.
You know, I wrote in my notes, if you saw it, I wrote Pie Day because I thought you had a song like apple pie, cherry pie. And then as soon as you said
I actually do have a song about sweet potato pie.
But this one,
I could have talked about that
too.
too.
This song about pie, I was like, oh, I know what he's talking about.
So technically, I have two pie songs. One is actually about pie, the number, and the other one is about
oh my gosh,
a pie. If you go to YouTube and see my sweet potato pie song, it's called Sweet Potato Pie. It's like you remember Domino?
Yeah.
That song.
Yeah. Here we go.
Yeah. He had that song Sweet Potato Pie.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like a cover of that. Basically, I decided I was gonna remix it and make the song about actual sweet potato pie.
Oh my gosh.
And it was started off as a way for me to memorize my sweet potato pie recipe without having to look in my little cookbook that I was writing. And eventually I was like, wait a minute, this is actually pretty good. I recorded it. Got some fans to send me videos. I was like, okay, here's a little thing. I gave them the recipe. I was like, look, here's the song. You can get it. You get the early copy of this song, but the catch is you have to film yourself making your sweet potato pie using this recipe, and send me the video. And they worked into the music video, so you'll see like fans and stuff posing with their pies they made. But it's a pretty good. I'm proud of my recipe, but also the song. And Domino actually liked it. He was like, "You did your thing, homie." I was like, that, I was
That's
like,
amazing.
yeah, that made me feel good.